If you know anything about automotive history, you know Carroll Shelby stands at the very top as the legend who built icons like the Cobra and saved Ford's GT40 program. For decades, car enthusiasts tracked every Shelby prototype ever made, assuming every legendary chassis had already been cataloged. But behind closed doors, Shelby kept a personal collection of rare builds and experimental projects away from the public eye. When historians and collectors finally went through his private garage, they pulled the cover off an untouched, one-of-a-kind machine that nobody expected to find. So, what was the unbelievable car hidden inside Carroll Shelby's personal garage? Let's dive into it. Before the Cobra, the extraordinary racing life of Carroll Shelby. Long before Carroll Shelby became the man whose name would be stamped onto some of the most legendary cars ever built, he was just a boy growing up in Leesburg, Texas, with an unusual fascination with anything that could move fast. Born on January 11, 1923, to Warren Shelby, a rural mail carrier, and Eloise Shelby, Carroll was drawn to speed almost instinctively. By the time he was 7, his family had moved to Dallas, and while other children were simply playing outside, Shelby was already looking for something more exciting. Around the age of 10, he would ride his bicycle to nearby dirt tracks just to watch cars tear around the circuit. He was not simply watching races either, he was studying them, absorbing the noise, the movement, the drivers, and the machines that seemed to turn speed into an art form. By 15, he was already driving and taking care of his father's Ford, and before long, he was learning the limits of his own Willys automobile. Nobody could have known it then, but that childhood obsession with speed was quietly setting him on a path that would eventually lead to a machine unlike anything sitting in an ordinary garage. Shelby's fascination with cars was only one part of the story, because before he became a professional racer, he learned to handle something even less forgiving than a race car. After graduating from high school in 1940, he enrolled at the Georgia Institute of Technology to study aeronautical engineering. But his education would soon take a very different direction. In April 1941, Shelby enlisted in the United States Army Air Corps, just months before the attack on Pearl Harbor changed the course of American history. He began pilot training later that year at Randolph Field in Texas, and eventually earned his wings, becoming a second lieutenant in December 1942. Instead of spending his early adult years behind the wheel, Shelby was now sitting in the cockpit, learning how to control powerful machines in the air. He served as a flight instructor and test pilot, flying aircraft such as the Beechcraft AT-11 Canson and Curtiss Wright AT-9 Jeep. Later, he would fly larger aircraft, including the B-18 Bolo, B-25 Mitchell, A-26 Invader, and eventually the enormous B-29 Superfortress. That experience would matter more than anyone realized because Shelby was learning something that would define nearly everything he did afterward: how to make a machine perform beyond what people thought it was capable of. When Shelby left military service after the end of World War II, there was no obvious sign that he was destined to become an automotive legend. In fact, his early attempts at building a life after the war were anything but glamorous. He started a dump truck business, worked as an oil well roughneck, and later tried his hand at running a poultry farm. That business eventually went bankrupt in 1952, leaving Shelby at a crossroads. But sometimes the biggest turning points come when everything else falls apart. For Shelby, that turning point arrived on a racetrack. In January 1952, at the age 0F29, he entered an amateur race at Grand Prairie Naval Air Station, driving his friend Ed Wilkins' MGTC. It was not some purpose-built racing monster, and Shelby was not yet the famous driver people would one day recognize. He was simply a man discovering what happened when his instincts, courage, and love of speed were finally given a place to work. Later that year, he climbed behind the wheel of Charles Brown's Cadillac Allard and began winning races, collecting trophies even when there was little money involved. By the end of that first season, something had become clear. Shelby had found the world where he belonged. The wins began coming faster. In 1953, Shelby raced Cadillac Allards and won 8 or 9 events, building a reputation as a driver who was willing to push himself and his machinery harder than most people around him. Then came 1954, and suddenly his world became much bigger. Shelby traveled to Argentina for the 1000 Kilómetros de la Ciudad de Buenos Aires, where he crossed paths with John Wyer, the team manager for Aston Martin. That meeting opened the door to international racing, and Shelby soon found himself driving Aston Martins in major European events. He competed at Aintree and Le Mans, finished 5th at Monza with Graham Whitehead, and later joined Aston Martin's factory team at Silverstone alongside Peter Collins and Roy Salvadori. The 3 Aston Martins finished 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Shelby was no longer an unknown American driver trying to prove himself. He was becoming a serious international competitor, and the more races he entered, the more dangerous he became to anyone standing between him and victory. But Shelby's rise was never a smooth one. The faster he became, the more dangerous the machines became as well. In 1954, he joined Donald Healey's team and took part in record-setting runs at Utah's Bonneville Salt Flats. Shelby and the team established dozens of Class D national speed records, with Shelby personally setting 17 of them. Yet that same year, his pursuit of speed nearly changed everything. During the Carrera Panamericana, Shelby suffered a serious crash while driving an Austin Healey. He endured months of operations and still returned to racing the following year. Instead of stepping away, he went back to the track and won roughly 10 races in 1955, including a strong second-place finish at Sebring in Alan Guiberson's Ferrari Monza. Then came 1956, and Shelby seemed almost unstoppable. He won around 30 more races, began driving for John Edgar, opened Carroll Shelby sports cars in Dallas, and even set a record at the Mount Washington Hill Climb in a specially prepared Ferrari 375 GP Roadster. By then, the man from Texas had become one of the most feared drivers in American motorsport. Shelby's reputation only grew from there. In 1957, another serious crash at Riverside left him with major facial injuries, but only months later, he returned to the same track and won against drivers such as Maston Gregory and Dan Gurney. For the second consecutive year, Sports Illustrated named him its Driver of the Year. Then, in 1958, Shelby returned to Europe with Aston Martin, competing in some of the toughest races on the calendar. He drove the DBR3, the DBR1, and even entered several Formula One races in a Maserati 250F. But all of those experiences were leading towards something far bigger than another trophy. Shelby was learning what made a race car fast, what made it reliable, and perhaps most importantly, what made a machine come alive in the hands of the right driver. Every crash, every victory, and every car he drove was adding another piece to a knowledge base that would soon make him far more than a racing driver. Then came 1959. Shelby and Roy Salvadori were paired together in an Aston Martin DBR1 for the 24 Hours of Le Mans, one of the most demanding races in the world. For 24 hours, the car had to survive relentless speed, changing conditions, mechanical strain, and the pressure of one of motorsport's biggest stages. When it was finally over, Shelby and Salvadori had won. For Shelby, it was the defining victory of his racing career. He would later describe winning the 24 hours as probably the greatest thrill he ever got from racing. But the irony was that his greatest racing achievement came just as his driving career was approaching its final chapter. In 1960, he continued competing, winning at Riverside and Castle Rock before driving his final race at the Los Angeles Times Grand Prix. By then, however, Shelby had already learned everything he needed to know about speed. When Shelby finally stepped away from racing, the story could have ended there. He had won major races, conquered some of the toughest circuits in the world, driven Ferraris, Maseratis, Aston Martins, and countless other machines, and established himself as one of the greatest American drivers of his generation. But Shelby was not the kind of man who could simply walk away from the world that had consumed his life. If he could no longer race at the same level, there was another way to stay in the game. He could build the machines himself, and that decision would eventually transform him from a celebrated driver into the man behind the Cobra, the Shelby GT350, the GT500, and the legendary Ford GT40 program. Yet even after the world became familiar with the Shelby name, there were still machines connected to his career that remained far less familiar. Some were prototypes, some were experiments, and at least one extraordinary car would remain tucked away from public view for years, waiting for someone to finally pull back the cover. The cars that made Carroll Shelby a legend. By 1960, Carroll Shelby had already reached the highest level of professional racing, but his time behind the wheel was beginning to come to an end. In May of that year, Shelby was diagnosed with angina pectoris, a hereditary heart condition that reduced blood flow to his heart. He continued racing for a short time, but by 1961, the condition had forced him to retire from professional driving. After years of competing at some of the fastest and most demanding circuits in the world, Shelby now had to find another way to remain part of the sport. That transition happened quickly. In 1961, Shelby and Pete Brock opened the Shelby School of High Performance Driving at Riverside, with Ken Miles among the instructors. Shelby could no longer rely on his own body to carry him through another race, but he still had years of experience understanding what made a car fast and what separated a competitive machine from an ordinary one. That knowledge soon found a new outlet. Shelby believed America needed a lightweight, street-legal sports car that could compete with Corvettes at home and Ferraris in Europe. His formula was straightforward: combine a lightweight European chassis with the power of an American V8. In 1962, he found the right starting point in the AC Ace. AC agreed to supply the chassis, while Ford provided its V8 engines and transmissions. The first prototype, CSX-0001, became the Shelby AC Cobra, and production began that same year. The Cobra immediately changed Shelby's position in the automotive world. He was no longer simply the driver climbing into someone else's machine. He was building the cars himself, and he wanted them to race. But competition quickly exposed a weakness. The Cobra was brutally fast, yet its open roadster body created too much aerodynamic drag on high-speed circuits. Ferrari's GT cars could exploit that advantage, so Shelby needed a different shape. The answer was the Shelby Daytona Coupe, with its low roof and enclosed body designed to cut through the air more efficiently. The change transformed the Cobra into a serious high-speed competitor. In 1964, the Daytona Coupe won 3 GT class races in the World Sports Car Championship, including the 24 Hours of Le Mans and the Tourist Trophy at Goodwood. Then, in 1965, Shelby American won the World Manufacturers GT Championship, giving an American manufacturer a title Ferrari had dominated for years. Ford was watching closely. The company's GT40 program had suffered repeated failures against Ferrari, and Shelby American was brought in to help turn the project around. Shelby focused heavily on reliability, particularly the transmission, while helping develop the GT40 Mark II around Ford's massive 7.0-liter Ford 27 cubic inch V8. The changes produced the result Ford had been chasing. At Le Mans in 1966, Ford finished first, second, and third, finally defeating Ferrari on one of the most important stages in motorsport. Carroll Shelby, Ken Miles, and the Ford victory Ferrari never saw coming. By the time Ford decided it was going to beat Ferrari at Le Mans, Carroll Shelby already knew exactly what kind of challenge the company was facing. He had raced against Ferrari, competed at Le Mans, and won the race himself in 1959. More importantly, he understood something Ford was quickly learning the hard way. Having a fast car was not enough. If you wanted to win Le Mans, the car had to survive 24 hours of punishment without falling apart. And that was exactly where Shelby's experience would become so important. The anger between Ford and Ferrari had started years earlier, and it had nothing to do with racing at first. In 1963, Ford tried to buy Ferrari after Enzo Ferrari began looking for financial backing for his company. The negotiations went surprisingly far. Ford believed the deal was almost finished, only for Ferrari to walk away at the last moment. Ferrari reportedly objected to restrictions that would have given Ford influence over his racing operations, while another theory suggested he was using the negotiations to push Fiat into making a better offer. Whatever the real reason, Henry Ford II was furious, and instead of letting the embarrassment disappear, Ford decided to take it to the racetrack. If Ferrari would not become part of Ford, then Ford would build a car capable of beating Ferrari at the one place where the Italian company seemed almost untouchable. The target was the 24 Hours of Le Mans, where Ferrari had already won 5 straight times from 1960 through 1964. Ford threw an enormous amount of money at the problem. The company reportedly invested around $10 million into its GT racing program, hoping to create a machine powerful enough to finally knock Ferrari from the top. That machine became the Ford GT40, but the first attempts were anything but impressive. In 1964, Ford failed to win. Then came 1965, and things became even worse. 4 Ford cars entered Le Mans, and none of them finished. Ferrari, meanwhile, kept winning. The very team Ford had set out to defeat was continuing to dominate the race, while Ford's expensive new racing program was starting to look like a failure. That was when Carroll Shelby entered the picture. Shelby had already proven that he knew how to take an idea and turn it into a serious racing machine. The Cobra had shown what happened when American V8 power was combined with a lightweight European chassis. Then the Daytona Coupe had taken that formula even further, defeating Ferrari in GT competition. Now Ford wanted Shelby to help do something similar with the GT40. The problem was that the GT40 did not need more bragging rights. It needed to finish. The car had plenty of speed, but reliability had become its biggest enemy. The transmission was one of the major trouble spots, and Shelby's team went to work improving the running gear and strengthening the car. The GT40 Mark II was developed around Ford's massive 7.0-liter 427 cubic inch V8, but Shelby understood that all that power meant very little if the car could not make it through the night. And there was another person Shelby trusted to help find those limits: Ken Miles. Miles had already worked with Shelby on the Cobra and the Daytona Coupe, and the two men had developed a relationship built around racing, testing, arguing, and constantly trying to make the cars better. Miles was the kind of driver who could tell Shelby exactly what the car was doing once it was pushed to the edge. Shelby could then take that information and turn it into changes that made the machine stronger. Together, they were about to get their biggest opportunity. In 1966, Ford returned to Le Mans with a much stronger GT40 program. Ferrari entered only 2 official cars, while Ford brought 8. 3 of the Fords were under Shelby's direct supervision, including the cars driven by Ken Miles and Denny Hume, Dan Gurney and Jerry Grant, and Bruce McLaren and Chris Amon. Then the race began. For the next 24 hours, the GT40s hammered around the French circuit, racing through the day, into the night, and back into the morning. The cars had to endure more than 3,000 miles of racing, while the drivers battled exhaustion, changing conditions, and the constant possibility of mechanical failure. But this time, the GT40s kept running. Ferrari's 2 official cars eventually failed to finish, while Ford's machines remained at the front. And as the final hours approached, something happened that Ford had been waiting years to see. 3 Fords were leading Le Mans. Ken Miles and Denny Hume were in first. Bruce McLaren and Chris Amon were second. Ronnie Bucknam and Dick Hutcherson were third. Ferrari was gone. The team that had dominated Le Mans for years had finally been beaten, and Ford was now sitting on the verge of taking all 3 places on the podium. But Ford wanted the ending to be bigger than that. Ford racing director Leo Beebe came up with the idea of having the leading GT40 slow down and cross the finish line together. The plan was to create a spectacular 3-car finish that would make it impossible for anyone to forget what Ford had accomplished. The cars came together as they approached the finish. For anyone watching, it looked like 3 Fords were about to cross the line in a perfect dead heat. But there was a complication. Because McLaren and Amon had started farther back on the grid, they had traveled slightly farther during the race. That meant the finish could not simply be decided by which car physically reached the line first. After the results were calculated, McLaren and Amon were officially declared the winners, with Miles and Hume finishing second. It was an incredible victory for Ford, but for Miles, it was a bitter ending. He had been leading the race. He had spent years working with Shelby to develop the cars. He had pushed the GT40 through 24 hours of punishment, only to lose the official victory because of the decision to stage the finish. Still, what Ford had accomplished that day was far bigger than one driver's finishing position. The 3 GT40s took the entire podium. Ford had finally beaten Ferrari at Le Mans, and it had not been a lucky victory. The GT40 had finally become the kind of machine Shelby knew it needed to be. Fast enough to challenge Ferrari, strong enough to survive the race, and reliable enough to keep running long after the competition had disappeared. The victory at Le Mans did not mean Carroll Shelby was going to spend the rest of his life chasing trophies. By 1970, after roughly 5 years of working closely with Ford, Shelby decided it was time to step away from the automobile business. He had already helped build the Cobra, developed the Daytona Coupe, played a major role in turning the GT40 into a Le Mans winner, and helped create some of Ford's most recognizable performance cars. Shelby spent much of the 1970s away from the racing world, traveling through Africa for months at a time and enjoying a quieter life on his Texas ranch. He also continued his love of chili, eventually becoming associated with the Terlingua International Chili Championship in Texas. But Shelby had never been particularly good at staying away from cars for too long. By the early 1980s, he was back. This time, his comeback came through Dodge. Lee Iacocca, who had become chairman of Chrysler, brought Shelby in to help give Dodge something it desperately needed: performance cars that could stand out in a changing American market. Shelby took the challenge seriously, working on a series of Dodge performance models throughout the 1980s, including the Shelby Charger and the Dodge Omni GLH. Then Shelby's life took another major turn. After years of dealing with the heart condition that had forced him out of racing decades earlier, he underwent a heart transplant in 1990. The procedure gave him more time, but Shelby was already approaching his 70s and could easily have decided that his most important work was behind him. Instead, he kept going. Shelby returned to his own company and continued developing cars, including new versions of the Cobra. Then, in the early 2000s, another chapter of his relationship with Ford began. In 2002, Shelby resumed working with the company as a consultant, bringing his experience back into the Ford performance world. In 2004, the Ford Shelby Cobra concept appeared at major auto shows, combining the unmistakable shape of the original Cobra with modern engineering. A year later came the Ford Shelby GR1 concept, a futuristic coupe inspired by the Shelby Daytona Coupe. Neither car reached regular production, but they showed that Shelby's influence was still strong enough to shape Ford's ideas decades after the original Cobra had first appeared. Then came the car that would put the Shelby name back on the Mustang in a major way. At the 2005 New York International Auto Show, Ford introduced the new Shelby GT500. It became available for the 2007 model year with a supercharged 5.4-liter V8 producing 500 horsepower. Shelby was not responsible for every detail of the car, but his input still mattered, including his push for wider rear tires to give the Mustang better performance. There were also special projects such as the Shelby GTH, created through a new partnership with Hertz that brought back the spirit of the famous Shelby rental cars from the 1960s. The Shelby name was once again attached to fast Mustangs, special editions, and experimental designs. But Shelby's later years were not simply about building new cars. He was also becoming the keeper of a legacy that had grown far beyond what anyone could have imagined when he first put a V8 into an AC chassis. He had gone from racing driver to car builder, from Ford to Dodge and back again, surviving serious crashes, a career-ending heart condition, a heart transplant, and decades of change in the automotive industry. Carroll Shelby's final mystery, the car nobody knew about. Carroll Shelby spent his life putting extraordinary cars into the hands of the public, but some of the most interesting pieces of his automotive history were never meant to be seen by everyone. Behind the Cobra, the GT40, the Shelby Mustangs, and all the famous machines carrying his name was a much more private collection of projects, memories, and cars that stayed out of the spotlight. And after Shelby died, that private world became even more intriguing when people began going through what he had left behind. One particular car would eventually stand out, not because it was one of his most famous creations, but because almost nobody knew it was there. To understand why that discovery matters, you have to understand the man who spent his entire life collecting stories like this. Carroll Shelby's life away from the racetrack was almost as unpredictable as his career behind the wheel. He was married 7 times, beginning with Jean Fields, whom he married in 1943. The couple had 3 children, Sharon Ann, Michael Hall, and Patrick Burt, before divorcing in 1960. Shelby's personal life became increasingly complicated after that. He married actress Jan Harrison in 1962, although the marriage was annulled later that same year. His third marriage, to a woman from New Zealand, lasted only a few weeks, while his fourth, to Sandra Brandstetter, lasted a couple of years. Then, after spending nearly 3 decades mostly single, Shelby married Cynthia Saros in 1989. Around the same period, he finally received the heart transplant he had been waiting for after decades of dealing with the heart condition that had ended his racing career. But even that could not keep Shelby away from cars. He later married Helena Lena Dahl, a Swedish woman he had first met years earlier. Their marriage was the only one that did not end in divorce, annulment, or separation. Tragically, Lena died in a car accident in 1997. Just 4 months later, Shelby married his final wife, Cleo, a British former model who also drove rally cars. She was 25 years younger than Shelby, and their marriage eventually reached divorce proceedings before his death. Yet, for all the changes in Shelby's personal life, one thing remained remarkably consistent. Cars were always there. Shelby had already received a heart transplant in 1990, and in 1996, he underwent a kidney transplant, with his son Michael serving as the donor. His health had given him more than enough reasons to slow down, but Shelby kept working, designing, advising, building, and finding new ways to stay involved in the automobile business. That was simply who he was. As a driver, Shelby's greatest racing achievement was winning the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1959, but his reputation ultimately became much bigger than that one victory. He helped create the Cobra, transformed the Daytona Coupe into a Ferrari-beating machine, played a major role in Ford's GT40 victories, and later worked on performance cars for Dodge and Ford. He could have retired many times. He didn't. Even when his health forced him away from racing, he found another way back into the garage. Even when one company relationship ended, another project appeared. And even when he finally reached the age where most people would have been happy to leave their working life behind, Shelby continued surrounding himself with cars. He died on May 10, 2012, at the age of 89. By then, Carroll Shelby had become one of the most influential figures in American automotive history. His name was attached to some of the most recognizable performance cars ever built, and collectors had spent decades documenting his work. So you would think there couldn't possibly be many surprises left. But that was the problem. Everyone knew about the Cobra. Everyone knew about the Daytona. Everyone knew about the GT40 and the Shelby Mustangs. The famous cars had been photographed, raced, sold, restored, and studied for decades. What people did not know was what Shelby had kept for himself. And when his private garage was eventually examined more closely, something surfaced that did not fit neatly into the list of cars everyone already knew. It was a machine connected to Shelby's story, but unlike the famous cars that had made his reputation, this one had remained almost completely out of sight. After a lifetime of building cars for the world to see, Carroll Shelby had somehow managed to keep one remarkable piece of his automotive history hidden in his own garage. And when they finally uncovered it, the question was no longer whether Shelby had left behind another car. The question was how this particular machine had remained hidden for so long. Without the help of Carroll Shelby, do you think Ford would have stood a chance against Ferrari? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.